The Young and the Restless spoilers Monday, October 27, 2025. The restless air around Genoa City and Los Angeles carried the same electric pulse that always signaled a turning point in The Young and the Restless. The lives of the Abbotts, the Newmans, and those orbiting their gravity fields were beginning to twist together in new, volatile patterns. Kyle Abbott, once the charming heir with ambition and polish, had become a man chasing ghosts across cities, his obsession with Claire Newman now mutating into desperation. He had followed her to Los Angeles, humiliated himself trying to expose Holden Novak, and now, seeking justification for his actions, he turned once more to Sienna Bacall, the enigmatic nightclub owner whose calm defiance had both unnerved and fascinated him. The last encounter between them had left him shaken. Her quiet warning had been like a mirror reflecting his unraveling self. Yet Kyle convinced himself he needed closure, that a visit to Sienna would help him regain control of the narrative. In truth, he wanted someone to validate his paranoia, to tell him he was right about Holden, even as every instinct in him screamed that he was spiraling. He arrived at her club late in the evening, cloaked in a false confidence that barely held together. The music pulsed through the dim light like a heartbeat, and the familiar scent of smoke and cologne filled the air. Sienna was there, composed as always, her eyes sharp enough to slice through his pretenses. This time she didn't even feign surprise. She had seen this type of man before, those who returned not for answers but for justification. She listened to him talk about Claire, about Holden, about betrayal and loyalty, and she said little. Her silence was deliberate, forcing him to confront the emptiness in his own words. When he finally stopped, drained and expectant, she gave him the same look she had given the first time, a warning without sympathy. If he continued down this path, there would be nothing left of the man he once was. Kyle left her club without the validation he craved, only the echo of her indifference and the quiet realization that he had become the villain in his own story. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of a Los Angeles hotel, Claire Newman faced a reckoning of her own. Her time away from Genoa City had given her clarity, but Holden Novak's presence had stirred feelings she hadn't anticipated, trust, safety, and a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. Yet Kyle's shadow still lingered, his obsessive pursuit leaving questions she could no longer ignore. She confronted Holden not out of suspicion but necessity, needing to know if there was truth behind Kyle's relentless accusations. Holden, composed but visibly weary, explained the situation with Sienna in calm, measured tones. There was nothing romantic, no hidden betrayal, only a brief business disagreement that Kyle had turned into a fantasy of deceit. Claire listened, torn between empathy and exhaustion. She had spent so much of her life surrounded by men who mistook control for affection, who believed love meant possession. Now, standing before someone who simply told the truth and let her choose what to believe, she felt the weight of her choices pressed down. When Kyle later found her in the hotel restaurant, still raw from his encounter with Sienna, she met him with a calmness that cut deeper than anger. She told him she wasn't calling him back to Genoa City, that whatever bond they once had couldn't survive the constant cycle of obsession and apology. She thanked him for the kindness he had shown her in better times, acknowledging that there had been love once, but also pain too sharp to forget. Kyle tried to argue, to promise change, to offer time and space as if those words could erase the damage, but Claire was already beyond persuasion. When Holden arrived moments later, the tension in the air crystallized into finality. She turned to Kyle and told him the choice was his, to stay or to walk away, but either way, her life was moving forward without him. The words were gentle, but they felt like a closing door. Back in Genoa City, a different kind of tension brewed, one that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with power. Sally Spectra sat across from Billy Abbott in the sleek conference room of Abbott Communications, the atmosphere thick with unspoken rivalry. Billy had come under the pretense of business, but as always, his interest lay somewhere between genuine concern and strategic manipulation. He praised Sally's leadership, calling her innovative and bold, but the compliment came with an edge sharp enough to cut. The moment he mentioned her decision to hire Audra Charles, the mood shifted. Billy didn't hide his skepticism. He questioned Sally's judgment, implying that Audra's reputation for ambition and chaos could jeopardize the company's fragile stability. Sally, however, was not a woman who folded under scrutiny. She defended Audra fiercely, reminding Billy that everyone in Genoa City had a complicated past, including him. Audra had made mistakes, yes, but she had also learned from them, and Sally believed in second chances. Her tone was steady but firm, each word measured, each glance a reminder that she had earned her position through grit, not privilege. Billy pressed further, warning her that Jill Abbott would not be pleased when she learned of the hiring decision, but Sally brushed it off with the confidence of someone who had already thought 5 moves ahead. Just as the tension reached its peak, Audra herself walked in, radiant and unapologetically confident. Her arrival shifted the dynamic instantly. She greeted them with a bright, professional smile and a disarming warmth that concealed her sharp mind. She announced that she was ready to return to work, eager to rebuild, to prove that she was more than her reputation. Her enthusiasm filled the room, and for a fleeting moment, even Billy seemed disarmed. But Sally quickly reminded them both that there was still business to handle. She mentioned that all new hires had to be reported to their new, unnamed investor, a figure shrouded in mystery, rumored to be powerful enough to alter the company's future. Sally's tone carried both excitement and unease as she assured them there was nothing to worry about. Yet her eyes flickered with something unreadable, the kind of caution that only those who've been burned by power recognize. In truth, Sally was juggling more than anyone knew. Protecting Audra was not just an act of friendship but strategy. Audra's network, her ability to maneuver through th. The night in Los Angeles had that slow, velvety hum of anticipation, the kind that always made people behave in ways they later regretted. At a quiet hotel restaurant, Claire Newman sat across from Holden Novak, her eyes heavy with fatigue and confusion, yet softened by the calm he carried with him. The dinner had been meant as a reprieve, a brief moment of normalcy away from the chaos Kyle Abbott had unleashed in her life. But even as Holden spoke, even as she tried to focus on the present, a familiar restlessness stirred in the distance. Somewhere out there, Kyle was still circling her like a storm too stubborn to dissipate. Holden noticed her silence and reached for a gentler subject, but she was no longer listening to the words. She could feel him, Kyle, haunting the edges of her conscience like an echo she couldn't quite silence. Across town, that intuition proved correct. Kyle had left the hotel shortly after seeing Claire and Holden together, his jaw tight, his heart pounding with the familiar mix of jealousy and humiliation. His steps led him inevitably to the dark room, Sienna Bacall's infamous nightclub, a sanctuary for the rich, the reckless, and the wounded. The neon sign above the door flickered like a pulse, and Kyle paused for only a second before walking in. Inside, the air was thick with perfume, secrets, and low music that seemed to vibrate through the bones. He spotted Sienna easily, composed as ever, a woman who didn't belong to any world but her own. She was standing near the bar, giving instructions to a staff member, her tone efficient yet cool, her poise that of someone who had long ago stopped being impressed by powerful men. Kyle introduced himself immediately, using the polished tone that had once made him so effective in business meetings and family negotiations. "I'm Kyle," he said, "from Genoa City." The way he said it carried the weight of lineage, as though the Abbott name itself should open doors. Sienna raised a brow, her expression revealing nothing. He told her he was looking for information about Holden Novak, that he had reason to believe Holden wasn't who he seemed to be. When she asked why, his voice faltered for the first time. "I'm just trying to protect someone," he said. "The woman I love." Sienna's silence stretched long enough to make him uncomfortable. Then, with a faint hint of pity, or was it amusement, she told him the truth he didn't want to hear. Claire was already at the hotel with Holden, enjoying her evening, living her life. Sienna tilted her head slightly, her tone even but cutting. "It's unfortunate," she said, "but it sounds like she's moved on." "That's bad luck for you." The words landed like ice against his pride. He tried to mask his reaction, forcing a tight smile, but she could see the flicker of anger behind his eyes. She had met men like him before, the ones who couldn't accept that love was not ownership. Unwilling to give up, Kyle shifted tactics. If Sienna wouldn't talk about Holden, perhaps he could corner her with another name. What about Audra Charles? He asked, leaning closer, his voice lowering to that sharp, probing tone that sounded less like curiosity and more like accusation. You must know something about her. But Sienna only laughed softly, the sound more dangerous than kind. You have a lot of enemies for someone who claims to be in love, she replied. When she refused to answer, Kyle tried to read her expression, convinced that her silence was hiding something. You flinched when I mentioned her, he pressed. You're not as detached as you pretend to be. Sienna's eyes hardened at that, the polite mask slipping just enough to reveal the warning beneath. Before she could respond, her phone rang, a call from her husband, the one detail of her personal life she guarded fiercely from the gossip-hungry crowd that frequented her establishment. She answered in a low voice, her expression softening momentarily. When she hung up, she looked at Kyle with the detached professionalism of someone ending a meeting. Come back another time, she said, turning away before he could speak again. The conversation was over, and for all his efforts, Kyle had achieved nothing except to further expose his desperation. Back at the hotel, the night had deepened, and the candlelight between Claire and Holden flickered in rhythm with the uncertainty hanging in the air. Holden had noticed the tension that seemed to follow her everywhere, the way her expression changed whenever Kyle's name surfaced. He didn't mock it, didn't scold her for it. Instead, he simply acknowledged the truth aloud, that Kyle was afraid of losing her, afraid of becoming irrelevant in her life. Then, after a pause, he admitted that he understood that fear all too well. The vulnerability in his tone startled Claire, disarming her more than any argument could have. He wasn't claiming her, he was confessing something. Claire sat quietly, swirling the wine in her glass, staring at the reflections it cast on the table. I'm trying to figure out what I really want, she said finally, her voice subdued but resolute. The past weeks had been a blur of pursuit and guilt, of trying to balance compassion for Kyle with her need for independence. Holden listened without interruption, his patience both reassuring and unsettling. When she asked if he thought she had made a mistake coming to Los Angeles, he smiled faintly, though there was sadness in it. Maybe this trip didn't give you the clarity you were looking for, he said gently, but sometimes confusion is the only way to reach truth. His words lingered in the air between them, and for the first time in a long while, Claire felt seen, not as an object of desire, but as a person standing at a crossroads, trying to understand herself. Outside, the city hummed like a restless heartbeat. Kyle stood on the street below, looking up at the glowing windows of the hotel, feeling the distance between himself and Claire grow wider with every minute. He told himself he was fighting for love, but the truth was far simpler and far darker. He was fighting against loss, against the unbearable reality that she might be happier without him. In chasing secrets through Sienna's world, he had only uncovered his own. And somewhere between the whispers of the dark room and the quiet intimacy of that hotel dinner, the story had already chosen its ending, one where love, no matter how desperately claimed, could no longer save him from himself. The air between Claire Newman and Holden Novak grew heavier as the night stretched on. The tension that had once belonged to Kyle now lingered between them in silence, subtle but undeniable. Claire could not shake the memory of seeing Holden with Sienna Bacall earlier in the week, the tense exchange, the guarded tone, the way his expression had hardened when her name was mentioned. For someone so composed, Holden had looked deeply unsettled that night, and Claire's curiosity had grown into suspicion. Now, sitting across from him, she watched the way his eyes avoided hers whenever Sienna's name surfaced. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice steady but sharp beneath the surface. She asked him directly what that argument had been about. Holden hesitated, his fork clinking softly against the plate before he set it down. The pause told her more than his words ever could. When he offered no clear answer, she pressed harder, her frustration surfacing after days of confusion. Is that why you didn't want me here? She asked, her tone a mixture of hurt and defiance. Are you hiding something from me? Holden's composure faltered for the first time, but he tried to diffuse the tension with calm reasoning. Claire leaned in, her voice low, eyes searching his face for the truth. She said she wanted to help, that whatever burden he was carrying didn't have to be his alone. "Why don't you just tell me what it is?" she asked, her heart pounding faster as her doubts piled up. "Or should I go ask Sienna myself?" The name hung between them like a dare. Holden's eyes darkened, and he exhaled slowly, as though weighing how much truth he could afford to share. Then he denied it all, saying that Sienna didn't know much about him, that their encounter had been over business, nothing more, nothing to worry about. His tone was even, but his avoidance was palpable. Claire wanted to believe him, but something about his restraint only deepened her unease. It wasn't just jealousy that fueled her suspicion, it was the sense that everyone she cared about lately, Kyle, Holden, even Nick, had layers she couldn't see through. While that uneasy conversation played out in Los Angeles, Genoa City had its own storm brewing behind the polished glass walls of corporate offices and half-truths whispered over coffee. Phyllis Summers had met Kane Ashby once again to continue what had become their routine morning conversation about the AI software. Her program, the one that had slipped from her grasp and into dangerous hands. But this time, there was a different energy in the air. Phyllis was unusually calm, her smile poised, her tone playful in a way that made Kane nervous. He noticed the subtle shift first when she stepped closer, closing the physical distance that usually kept their sparring professional. He instinctively took a step back, unsure whether it was discomfort or defense, and asked what she was doing. She grinned mischievously, the kind of grin that had always made men underestimate her. "Oh, what? You think I was about to kiss you," she teased, the mockery in her tone both alluring and disarming. Kane stiffened, muttering that it felt like a distraction. Phyllis laughed softly, a sound equal parts charm and danger. "I don't need to distract you," she said. "I don't have anything to hide." Her words carried that slippery mix of truth and misdirection that defined her best schemes. When Kane accused her of trying to manipulate him, she only smirked wider. "You think I'm trying to seduce you? That's ridiculous." She paused just long enough for the silence to burn, then added, almost casually, "Maybe you should stop worrying about me and start thinking about who stole your AI system." She tilted her head slightly, her tone turning colder. "It was Victor Newman. I've told you before." Kane frowned, unwilling to take her at face value. Victor's name carried too much weight, too many tangled histories to dismiss or confront easily. He suggested that if Phyllis was so sure, maybe she could prove it. Perhaps she could dig into Newman Enterprises' system again, the way only she could. The idea hung in the air like bait. But Phyllis was too sharp to bite. She recognized it instantly for what it was, the test. Her eyes narrowed with amusement as she asked if this was another loyalty check. Kane didn't deny it. He told her she needed to retrieve what was rightfully hers while he handled Victor as a distraction. His voice was calm, but there was something calculated behind it, something that made Phyllis's instincts hum with warning. When he left, the air around her shifted again, from banter to tension. Kane stepped outside, his expression tight with controlled anger. He took out his phone and made a quiet call to someone whose identity remained unknown, his voice low and deliberate. He instructed them to keep eyes on Phyllis, to follow her wherever she went, no questions asked. It wasn't trust driving him, it was containment. He needed to know what she would do next, whether her alliance with Victor was rumor or reality. Kane hung up and disappeared into the flow of traffic, a man weaving a web he couldn't fully control. Phyllis, meanwhile, stood by the window of her office, watching the reflection of herself in the glass. Her mind was already racing 3 steps ahead. She knew Kane didn't trust her, she also knew he was right not to. Victor Newman's name wasn't just a scapegoat, it was part of a larger play. She had texted him minutes after Kane left, "We need to meet. Urgent." The message was short but precise, the kind that Victor would recognize as an opening move. She didn't know yet whether she would sell Kane's AI technology to Victor or simply use it as leverage, but one thing was certain: control of that program meant power, and in Genoa City, power was the only currency that never devalued. As the night deepened, the parallel games of deception stretched across two cities. In Los Angeles, Claire was beginning to see that love came in many shades of secrecy. In Genoa City, Phyllis was proving that truth was just another weapon, one she wielded with unmatched precision. Kane thought he was monitoring her, but he didn't realize that Phyllis was already 2 moves ahead. And as for Victor, he never played defense. Whatever conversation awaited them next would reshape the hierarchy of power yet again. Far from both cities, Sienna Bacall was closing her club for the evening, unaware that her brief conversation with Holden had sparked the latest wave of suspicion. Her world was one of smoke and shadows, built on whispers that could make or break fortunes. If Kyle Abbott decided to return for answers, she would be ready, not with truth, but with whatever story best served her.